Just like to thank everybody for coming out tonight. My name is normally TJ Michon. I'm a 23-year resident of Garden City. I'm also an 18-year member of the paid part of the Garden City Fire Department and the president of the Firefighters Association for the Real Firefighters. I'd just like to thank everybody for taking the time to come out tonight. I know it's the middle of the summer, and unfortunately, the circumstances, we have to be doing this now. I guess before I get started, I'd just like to introduce the guys up here. I have yours. Raise your hand when I pull you out. I'm a senior member, Lieutenant Mark Frappier. He's a 30-year career firefighter and lieutenant. Lieutenant Peter Clancy. He's a 29-year career firefighter in Garden City and 12 years as a lieutenant. Lieutenant Frank Roca. 28 years, 9 years as a lieutenant. We have firefighter Tom Sterner. 34 years as a career firefighter, serving in Garden City. Firefighter Don Mara. 30 years career in Garden City. Firefighter Tom Trousdale. 27 years career in Garden City. If anybody recognizes the name, his wife is also a teacher over at Stewart School, one-time teacher in Garden City. Firefighter Mike Pasquarelli, 21 years career firefighter. Myself, again, I'm here 18 and a half years. Firefighter Mike Morgan, 16 and a half years, Garden City firefighter. Firefighter Paul Brower, 14 years. Lastly but not least, firefighter John Esposito, 13 years. Just so we're aware, we have a total of 261 years of firefighter experience here at the table today who've been serving as residents of Garden City. This gentleman here is Richard Cornfall. He's a longtime attorney for the Firefighters Association. He's here tonight to help answer some of your questions. Unfortunately, due to state law, certain things have to be answered a certain way, and Rich is here to make sure we don't screw up. Thanks, Rich. So why are we here tonight? So last week, with less than 48 hours notice, the village board put an agenda item to pass a resolution to basically abolish the 11 guys up here tonight. We had no prior notice of this. None of the village residents had prior notice of this, and it kind of came to a shock to everyone. We reached out to people we knew in the community that may be upset about this, and they drummed up some support. And after about 2 hours of public comments at Wednesday night's board meeting, the village board just went ahead and passed the resolution. What does that mean at this point? So, the resolution passed under New York State law is subject to what they call permissive referendum. So it has to be on hold for 30 days. Within that 30 days, the residents of Garden City who are opposed to the resolution have a right to sign a petition in opposition and bring that petition to the village officials, and it would force the resolution to a vote of a village-wide referendum. So at this time, the process has been started, but there's been a lot of misinformation distributed in the past week and a half. The career firefighters really haven't gotten involved in disseminating any information yet because we wanted to do it in the right way. So we're here tonight to try to address a lot of that information. And I think first and foremost, we'd like to deal with what does a petition mean? what does the petition give you as citizens as a right to do with this resolution. So first and foremost, by signing the resolution, you're not signing the petition for a referendum, you're not guaranteeing one side or the other anything. All you're doing is giving yourself the right as residents to force this to a vote. And sometime, come probably October, there will be a special election scheduled, and then you as citizens would have the right to go to the polls and vote yes or no on whether or not you agree with the resolution. So basically, as residents, you're taking the decision out of a small group of people's hands, and you're giving yourself the time to get educated on the subject, see what everything is, and then make an educated decision, and go to the polls and vote whether you want to keep a career combination fire department or you want to go to a volunteer fire. So there is information about, what does it mean if you sign a petition? If you sign it, it's going to create this or create that. The petition doesn't create anything. All the petition does is create an election, and then you can go to the polls and you can vote on what you want to do with the resolution itself. So we want to make that clear. Like I said, there's information and people are disseminating why not to. Don't sign a petition because if you sign it, this is automatically going to happen. And that's not true. The only thing that's going to happen is it's going to force it to an election, and you can vote on it. And in the meantime, you can learn, what the facts really are. You can ask questions. I would invite the board to have a public hearing, a public information session, something they haven't done leading up to it. So that's all questions we can get into and answer. Rich, do you have anything you want to add on the petition?
Petition has to be prepared and submitted within 30 days. And if there are not, it requires 20% of the persons who are electors who have voted in the last election in the village, so that it's important that this be done within 30 days. If not, then this resolution could possibly go forward and the paid fire department would be abolished. So the petition gives people the right to have their voices heard and have it for an election. And that's basically what it is. It's a permissive referendum, and the courts have upheld the right of residents to weigh in on this type of important decision, whether or not to eliminate and abolish a paid fire department. That's the law. It's Village Law 10, Section 1020. And the courts, the Appellate Division, Second Department in New York, and the Court of Appeals have upheld this. So it's your right as citizens to have your voices heard. And then as part of that, then all the issues, whether the benefits of having a paid department, having an all-volunteer department, all that is for you to decide with information. But what happened here was that a decision was made basically 48 hours where there was no study or impact or assessment done. So the question is, you want your voices heard and have an election so you can make a decision on something so important which could affect your lives.
Okay, yeah, we're going to go to questions. We got two guys with microphones over here that can walk around. We'll welcome all questions, and we're going to do our best to answer all questions. We just ask that raise your hand, we're going to line to you. If everybody's okay with it, if they don't mind if I stay seated at this point.
Thank you. I just wanted to know, what is 20% of the registered voters?
Right, so from our calculations, what we've figured it's about 3,600 signatures. We're looking to go way beyond that. You know, the other issue is people have to understand is the village, whether they choose to or not, have a right to challenge signatures that are on the petition, for whatever reason, you know. So, you know, we're not stopping at 3,600, or we're looking to go way beyond because we want, you know, the residents to have the voice and the residents to be able to tell the village, you know, this is a decision we need to make on our own and not left us, you know, to a small amount of people. So there are about 18,000 names on the elector list, you know, so we'll find ways to get it to you. There's residents out there, and we just want people to know. I'm a resident of Garden City. I don't agree with this as a resident. This is not a petition of firefighters. This is a petition for the residents, by the residents, and the residents have a right. And from the residents that I've spoken to, and myself, you know, we will assist as firefighters to help get the signatures. I asked the attorneys to help us get the petition right, because a few years ago in Portchester, they did the same thing. They got the signatures, but there was an error on the petition, and the petition was thrown out by courts. So, you know, we want to make sure that legally this is done right, so that your voices and people, if we do get all the signatures and people come out and speak, that petition then doesn't get thrown out by the courts. So that's why it's been a little delayed getting it out.
I'd just like to clarify something in my own mind. I must have misheard. 20% of the electors from the previous village election? No, from the entire...
So, it's
The
20%.
registered voters of the village of Garden City, not just those who voted in the last election.
No. It's the electors that were on the list from the last village election. So, anybody who registered to vote, let's say, after March 1st of last year, technically can't sign the petition. They will be able to vote if this goes to a village election. Then anybody who's an elector at this time, or at the time of the election, can vote. But the signatures have to come from the elector list that was in place at the last village election.
And you have that list?
We were provided a list by the village. That's the list we're using right now, and you know, in the process of also cross-referencing to make sure that it's a correct list.
Also say something.
Can you stand up?
Sure. You know, this is a wonderful time of the year where people like to go away and go out east and go off state and wherever. And so this is a very difficult. These are firefighters here. And, you know, so a lot of this we're doing for the first time, but the goal here is to communicate with everybody here in a very transparent way, and to try to just say like it is, what we have to do, and the work that, you know, is in front of us in terms of having to do this within 30 days, and having to reach out to people and communicate with them effectively so that they know what's at stake and what the issues are. And so, you know, it's a difficult task this time of year to do something like this, and that's why we're here, because we want to answer your questions and be totally transparent, and so you understand exactly what's at stake here. And we're doing this, everybody's here just rolling up their sleeves, and no one's descending on you, or, you know, this is the village of Garden City, this is the village you live and love it, and that's first and foremost.
Can you explain how the combination system works? Like you guys are in the firehouse 24/7, how's that work?
Okay, so in the country of the United States, there's three types of fire departments. You have a fully volunteer fire department, which is made up of all volunteers. You have a fully paid fire department, which is made up of all paid firefighters. And then you have combination departments. The combination departments are set up with a certain number of career personnel who are on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and then you also have supplemented with volunteers. The advantage of a combination department over a fully volunteer department, and in some cases a fully paid department, is that you get the best of both worlds. You actually have documentation here. I think it's the Incident City Management Association, which the village actually hired in 2012 to do a study of the fire department here in Garden City. They did a study prior to that, which actually states in the study that a combination fire department is the most efficient fire department there is. It's more efficient than a volunteer, and actually in most cases more efficient than a fully paid. And in most cases, property damage and other factors are less in a combination department. So for 90 years here in Garden City, back in the 20s, the forefathers of the community decided they wanted to have a combination department. And that's been in place, again, 90 years. The advantage to Garden City has always been, is there's always been a certain number of paid guys on duty. So when the call would come in, the trucks could roll immediately. What it did for the volunteers is, it took off the pressure of a volunteer to then have to respond to the firehouse to get a truck. Volunteers could respond immediately to the scene. If a volunteer lived up the block from an emergency call, he could just go down the block, and within a minute, there'd be a fire truck there with all the equipment he needed to fight a fire. If you didn't have that, and you had to wait for volunteers to go to trucks, that guy could run down the block and stand there with his gear on, but he wouldn't have the available equipment to actually enter a fire or an emergency without the proper equipment. So it's the best of both worlds. There's been some comments about the number of volunteers and how many are there and what they do at the scene. And one thing we want to make clear, we don't have an issue with volunteers. We appreciate the volunteers that have been here for years. We've always tried to maintain a good relationship, because when we get to a fire scene, even at our top staffing 6 years ago, 5 firemen at a fire scene can't do everything. Studies show that up to 16 firefighters are needed to start an operation in fire. So 5 firefighters weren't enough. And we know we needed to have 10 or more volunteers get there as quick as possible to fight a fire. So this is not about whether or not we need volunteers or not. But that's the basis of what a combination department is and what we have here in Garden City and what's been here for over 90 years. Is that up?
Stand up this time. So, let me just sort of tell you how I look at Garden City, which is that you have a geographic area, and one of the things that you really have here that's great is that you have firehouses that are strategically located. You have a firehouse in the east, you have a firehouse in the west, and you have headquarters. And at those different stations, you have fire apparatus, fire engine, put water on the fire, ladder truck at headquarters, fire engine at another. So when there's a fire call at one end of the town, you've got 24/7 paid firefighters who can, within seconds, minutes, get to that fire, and volunteers who can complement the paid firefighters to the scene. So while we have a firefighter bringing the truck up, connecting the hose, volunteers can then enter the building, put out the fire. If you have another fire at the other end of town, you have another firehouse. It's possible. I mean, you don't have that huge amount of fires, but it's possible to have emergency calls, gas leaks, whatever it is, in different parts of the town at the same time. So one of the real great advantages that you have in this village is you have 3 firehouses, strategically located. They can backfill each other, and with the volunteers that you have, you have an adequate supply of people coming to put out a fire. Now, one thing that is not mentioned here, and I think people know this intuitively, is that the faster you get water on a fire, the best in terms of containing that fire. And that means saving lives and limiting property damage. And so if you don't have that 24/7 coverage.
Is it 24/7 though?
It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, yes.
But are the houses manned on the weekends?
I'm sorry? Yes, they're manned on the weekends, yes. Yes,
All three of them?
yes.
Okay.
Alright, so, you have a question? Are all 3 firehouses manned on the weekends? Okay.
With career, I heard 24/7, that's why I was.
Yes, so, up until last November, the firehouses were manned 24/7 with at least 1 firefighter. 6 years ago, all 3 firehouses were manned with at least 2 firefighters in each firehouse. The numbers have been reduced up until last November. Change was made to the headquarters building to not be manned 24 hours a day if there wasn't a paid fire available. So basically what that equates to, and what Rich was saying is 6 years ago, all 3 sections of the village had an immediate coverage with the fire engine to get water on the fire. That has been reduced. The engine that water on a fire in the central section of Garden City has not been manned with a paid firefighter. So if there was no volunteers in the firehouse and the call came in the central part of the village, for the past, I want to say 4 years, either the Clinton Road Firehouse or the Edgemere Firehouse would be the first due into Central. Okay, that's one of the changes. But up until, to answer your question, up until November, 24 hours a day, there was at least 1 firefighter in all 3 firehouses.
I know you keep saying that there's paid firefighters in each house, but aren't there also always one of the 102 volunteers in the houses at all times? Aren't they on a schedule?
No,
There's not a volunteer in every house all the time?
no,
No? Okay.
no.
I didn't know that.
Well, there hasn't been. I have noticed that in the last few days or the last week, that there seems to be cars at all 3 firehouses. Okay, and again, we have nothing to do. We basically, as of last Thursday morning, we had to clear out of the firehouses, the locks were changed, and we had to move all our personal belongings, everything out. We haven't been. So, but just to understand something, the firehouse at Edgemere Road and the firehouse on Clinton Road, there's never been a history of volunteers ever hanging out of those firehouses or riding on the trucks with the paid guys. So, and I guess this goes into some of the stand down questions that are probably out there. There's no rules, agreements, or anything that stops a volunteer in a firehouse of getting on a fire truck that's driven by the paid fire. So, if we were in headquarters, the call came in, and a paid firefighter walked out and got on the fire truck, and there were 4 or 5 volunteers there already, nothing stopped them from getting on the truck with the paid guy and going. So, there's no stand-down rule, there's no rules that prevent volunteers and career firemen from going on the same trucks and operating at the same field.
I have 2 questions. One is, I've lived in this town many years. I'd like to know, has there ever been a board decision that's been changed in this town?
I can't answer that question.
Can the lawyer answer that? Has anyone checked on that? Because
Well, good, and I can answer this. The permissive referendum rule of law in State is not something that happens, I guess, often. You know, it's a tough process, and it takes an issue for a community to really want to come out and get the petitions and have the ability to take it to vote. It has happened just recently, I think, if you want to.
So the attorneys for the village challenged this law in Westchester, saying that the abolishment of a paid fire department was not subject to a permissive referendum. And we litigated that case in Westchester County, and we received a favorable decision. And the lawyers then appealed it, the village appealed it to the appellate division, and it was upheld. And they tried to go to the Court of Appeals, and they rejected it. So we've established the law in New York within the last couple of years that a decision to abolish a paid fire department is subject to a permissive referendum, which means that you, the residents, the citizens, have the right to weigh in on this. So I don't know the answer to your question about what's happened in the past. All I know is that on this subject area, you have the right to petition and for an election so that you can be heard. That's the law in New York, and that's why the resolution is worded the way it is. They know that this is your right.
Well, we have the right to petition, because I know that because I've signed many of them in this family. It doesn't matter. They do what they want to do. However, since you answered that question pretty well, the other question I have is a lot of folks at the town are talking about it's a union issue that's caused this.
Okay, so to address that, because I read a lot that's been posted out there and talked about, when it comes to the union, okay, these 11 guys here right now, and the guys that came before us, we are the union. There's no bigger, we're a part of bigger organizations, but the firefighting unions in the United States have a thing where all local unions, small unions, have their own autonomy. We don't follow the rules or direction of the bigger union as far as when it comes to negotiating contracts and the benefits and rights of our firefighters. So some people have said, you know, it's the big union that's stopping them from doing this. So it's, these 11 guys, myself, we, out from 1950-something to 2012, the Korea firefighter staff was always 35 guys. Since 2012, that number has dwindled down to 11. That number has dwindled to 11 with no public information, with no discussions in public, with no information disseminated to the residents on how the service is being cut. Throughout negotiations, it's been these members here who have sat down with the village. We don't have a guy who comes from Washington, D.C. or New York State and does our negotiation for us. We sit in on negotiations, and we only are concerned with negotiating for the guys that are here. So we're not being told by any bigger union or bigger thing that well, you can't take that deal because of this or anything else. So, you know, I know the union word for some people can be ugly, but this isn't about a union. This is about the career professional firefighters that have served Garden City for well over, as a union for well over 60 years. Before that, they were a fine and benevolent association. It would have paid firefighters. So this is, again, this is about the 11 guys here that have been protecting this village for, like I said, the youngest guy here is 13 years, most of the guys are well over 20.
So, what I heard earlier was, it's really important to get water on fire. And I think I heard you say, TJ, there is no stand down. Look at the two of those things together. Because there is a rule that says that paid firefighters have left with a fire truck. So while they can hop on another piece of equipment, a volunteer could hop on another piece of equipment, if, as has happened on multiple occasions, volunteers are ready first. While the outlying firehouses may in the past not have been manned by firefighters, it is common for there to be volunteer firefighters in the headquarters fire company. And there have been a number of situations where they were ready and had to stand down. In some of those situations, you guys have brought grievances. So how do you square that with the idea that it is critical to get a fire truck to the scene and water on the fire?
So to answer that question, we first have to clarify. And you were kind enough to put a letter to the editor this week. So I think the way it was referred to, or I don't know if it's your letter or the trustees took out a 2-page ad. But it's a policy which they refer to as paid members first policy. That is not an agreement. There is no agreement with the union that says paid members first. That is a chief's order that was developed by the chief and the village attorney to work around the agreement. So the agreement is, and this agreement goes back decades, and it was a safety agreement. The agreement in place was that all fire trucks from the 3 firehouses that responded to a fire scene were to be driven by the career paid firefighters. Now, I say it's a safety agreement because when that agreement, the inception is when the contract, which is 60 years old. But in 2002, there was a concession by the union to allow the volunteers to operate on certain pieces of apparatus. But the village, in protecting and guaranteeing that those other trucks would be responding, solidified that agreement that the paid drivers would be driving the fire trucks.
But the chiefs no longer want that agreement and haven't for a considerable period of time. And you guys continue to insist on the enforcement of something that is outdated and, as you said, is decades old from the time that you don't live in anymore.
Okay, so again, to answer that question, when that agreement was put in place and solidified, it was a safety agreement. The trustees and the village officials and the union willingly signed an agreement together.
The trustees did not.
Okay, that's your claim?
No, that's
your claim. The higher courts have ruled differently. So that's your claim. You were not a trustee or a sitting mayor at the time that agreement was done. So you can't sit here and say that the trustees weren't a part of it. Okay? The village administrator and the attorney for the village. Okay.
You're making a mistake. There is no document that's been submitted to any court that shows the Board of Trustees ever approved that.
Again, this is a claim, okay? But signed documents by village officials said with the approval of the village attorney and the Board of Trustees. So, again, you're making that claim, and that claim's been made at the higher courts and been denied. So, but I want to answer, let me answer your first question.
The claim is safe. That's the claim.
Okay, so the reason, again, when that agreement was signed, the people that signed it had no thought in their mind that that would ever be a job security clause, because you had 7 to 10 firefighters on duty at a time. The number of fire trucks driven by paid firefighters was 5. So if it was a job security clause, it would have protected 10 people. It was a safety clause. In the past 6 years, as former trustee Silver said, the fire chiefs and village officials decided that they no longer wanted to abide by that agreement. And they came to the union. And there's been discussions with the career firefighters about making changes. We've offered many changes over the time. Again, we've offered many changes over the time to adjust what can be driven by who. Every one of the offers made by career firefighters. At one point, there was even an offer where we would give up totally, and it was denied by the village. But what we're being told is, by village officials for the last 6 years, is that we won't compromise and allow volunteers to drive certain trucks and pay guys still to drive other trucks. We just want you to give it up, and we're not going to move forward until you guys just give up that agreement. Now, I bring up job security clause because the village has created a job security clause because they continue to reduce the number of firefighters. And at some point in the reduction of firefighters, this became an issue. And when discussed with the village, especially in the last 6 years, the firefighters were told, you don't need to worry about job security. You give this up, you do this, and everything will be fine. Now, it's hard for the career firefighters to believe any of that because 6 years ago, 6 firefighters were laid off and the lieutenant was demoted. There hasn't been a firefighter hired in Garden City since 2008. So in 2008, retirement happened, nobody was hired. So in the last 10 years, the staffing's been reduced from 36 to 11, or 12. We do have 12 employees. In 2013, 6 firefighters were laid off. There was a deal on the table to save those jobs, and the village basically said, no, we're laying them off because we want to save money this way. So now, we're at a point where, and again, here we are today because our jobs are again on the line. So, we've been more than willing to make adjustments. We also look at the safety level. We've asked the village on numerous occasions, what level of firefighters do you want to maintain? And we'll work with you to come up with staffing and response policies that will still give a safe, quick response to the village of Garden City. And we've never gotten anything back from them, other than basically that they want the ability to eliminate the career part of the fire.
That's not true because I was in the room, but you haven't addressed my question
Which one?
about standing down.
Okay, so
And the policy that remains in place that says volunteers have to stand down until you guys leave first. You haven't explained to me or anyone else in this room why that promotes safety in the village.
okay, so again, going back to it, the agreement in place is that the paid firefighters drive the fire trucks. In 2014, when the court said that that's a valid agreement and it has to be upheld, the chief of the department, okay, there was plenty of staff on duty to drive the fire trucks. What the chief of the department and the village attorney did is they came up with what they felt was a way to work around the agreement. So it was the chief and the attorney that came up with this policy that said, as long as the paid truck drives first out of the firehouse, then the volunteers can drive out of the firehouse second. That's an order, a policy that the chief put in place. The chief put that in place and we didn't agree with it. And we told him that's not even abiding by the agreement. We've offered again to adjust the agreement to allow volunteers to drive certain trucks and the paid guys to drive other trucks. But the village's answer has always been, no, we want full authority and you have to drop this and drop anything legally binding, and basically we're not negotiating with you until that happens.
But that's why the combination department isn't safe. Because
You know what?
because
If I could just interrupt, this is not just for you. This is for, there are many other people with their
One second, I just want to respond to that last comment. For 90 years, the combination department worked in Garden City and provided Garden City residents with the best model fire department on Long Island.
Yes.
finish, let me finish. Before 8 years ago, the Village of Garden City, or the village officials and the fire association, never went to contract arbitration. For the past 6 years, 7 years, we have just completed our second contract arbitration because the parties haven't been able to come to an agreement. Now, the question I would say to Trustee Silver is, why did it work for 90 years, and then all of a sudden, in the past 6 years, 7 years, has it not been able to work? And why has the village decided, the village officials decided, that they were happy eliminating paid firefighters? And why, and we've had plenty of meetings together, and I've said this to you personally on many occasions, why have you as a trustee, the trustees before you, and the trustees since you, not been willing to have an open forum, an open public meeting, and inform the residents of what the plan was, and have a debate on whether or not the village residents wanted to keep a career part of their fire department and a combination plan? Why has the trustees, 10 years, one public meeting, and you were part of a survey, you sent a survey out to the entire village, in depth, about what we should do with our recreation plan. And I said it.
That wasn't me, I wasn't. Let's move on. I haven't been there 2 years.
So again, I've asked, why not ask a survey, do a simple survey on the village residents?
It seems to me that there's two things involved as far as the response. It's as fast as you get the equipment there, and also when you're ready to go to work. Now, with your present staffing levels, you have 12 people, but there's not 12 on at any one time. There's maybe 3 or 4, and they're spread all over the place. And take Edgemere Road, for example, when you staff that, there was one guy there. Now, one guy is not going to do a lot as far as by himself. So he has to wait for volunteers to get there. They have to come in their cars. They have to gear up. They have to find a Scott pack. They have to find an officer, find out what needs to be done, etc. That's where there's time lost with your present system. Now, it's my understanding, let me finish. It's my understanding that, and I may be wrong because, like I say, I hear what I hear, but it was offered that you fellas get an opportunity to staff one truck out of headquarters, one engine with 4 people on it, which is about the staff. That engine would roll and be ready to go to work. Everybody in that engine would have his job. And as soon as that engine got to the fire, it would go off like a well-oiled machine, similar to the way the volunteer departments work. They are delayed, yes, getting to the firehouse. But when you sit in the seat and you tag in and you put your tag there, they not only know that you're in that seat so they can know you're there in case you get lost and count for you. That's your job. And that's what you're going to do when it pulls up. One man might be on the nozzle, one man on the hydrant, one man tying a truck in, one man pours the door, etc., etc. Everybody has a job and it has to be done. And that's the important thing. Now, my question is, were you offered this opportunity to man one truck? And by the way, the only other paid department on the island, Long Beach, does operate that way with one truck fully manned. Were you fellas given that opportunity to man one truck?
No.
Did you resist that? I heard you went to court to stop that so that you would keep this shotgun effect of one guy here, one guy there, one guy all over the place, which actually accomplishes nothing. Because one man on a truck.
What was the question? What was the question?
You know.
Question?
So the answer to your question is no. Okay. And to elaborate on that, 2012, the village hired a company to come in to do a study. And one of the suggestions in that study was that being a possibility, say on night tours, 4 guys working in. And the village volunteer chief at the time made a statement at a board meeting that the safer operation, which has been the operation in Garden City for 90 years, was to have the fire trucks respond from all 3 fire trucks. And at the time, those were manned with 2 firefighters, because it was the quickest, fastest way to get an engine, which brings the water, to the fire scene. And that one extra guy could start to get a line operation, and volunteers who live nearest that location go there and the engine will be there. That was the volunteer fire chief who said that. They rejected that, that suggestion about emptying the outside firehouses and making one firehouse. And we kind of agree with that, because water on a fire, as Rich said before, is the quickest way to save life and property. And it's not just the people that live in the house. Fire doubles in size as it burns. If that fire burns for an extra 3, 4, 5 minutes, it now becomes a more dangerous operation for the firefighters, paid or volunteer, that have to arrive there and now fight the fire. So if you can get to that fire in 5 minutes and put water on that fire, that's the quickest way to stop large fires and save lives.
It's very hard, sir, for me to hear you say that you heard, certain things which are inaccurate, and that kind of misinformation, I think, can be very dangerous in this type of situation that we're in. And it's very important that we try to get a good handle on the facts. Collective bargaining negotiations cover a lot. A lot can be said in collective bargaining negotiations. But I know everybody sitting here now personally, since we've been through a lot together. And I can tell you that there was a Saturday morning where I was in my kitchen and I had a lawyer, a prior lawyer for the village. Basically, I agreed on behalf of these fellows here, this union, that we would do away with any restrictions on who would man or operate a fire truck. We'd say, scrap it, we don't care. We'd take zeros. We'd give back family health insurance. Things, as a union labor lawyer, I thought were unheard of. Unheard of, giving up everything. And why did they do that? This man sitting right here, he told me to do this so as to avoid the layoffs. This is a real dedicated group of persons who not only dedicated that attorney, the prior attorney, Gary Fishberg, I told him what we'd be willing to do. We agreed to the trustees' offer, and then next thing you know, he told me that the new trustees said no deal, and they went ahead with the layoffs. Now those are facts, and this man was willing to give it all away, and this is a very democratic organization, everything gets vetted, and so I can just tell you that Saturday morning, I will never forget it. My wife said, "What did you just say?" And she heard me say it. And so those are the facts. There is nobody here who would not be willing to compromise, negotiate, and give up to protect, the other person sitting here and their lives and make compromises. So please don't listen to everything that you hear. We've never gone to court for anything like that. Yes, we have grievances. We're trying to enforce our contract. It's called the Taylor Law. We have a Taylor Law. We live by laws here. We negotiate contracts. It's done at the bargaining table. It's not my way or the highway. It's called arm's length, good faith negotiations. That's what there should be. And that's what I'd like to see here. And we're always willing to do that. But please don't believe everything that you're being told.
I have a question. I'd like to know know what the response time is of the volunteers? And are they coming from locally, or some of them working in the city, and the response time is different?
We really, but, so, there's never been a history in Garden City of a volunteer-only response. So, it's kind of hard to answer what the response time is going to be moving forward. You know, again, that's
Where are
something,
they coming from?
it depends on the day, the time, the night.
Are some of them working jobs in the city?
Okay, so a volunteer system throughout the United States is, a volunteer he does it voluntarily on his free time. If that volunteer has a job, you know, can't necessarily leave the job. He may work, like you said, work in the city, you know, so obviously he's not gonna get on a train to come home to a fire call. So again, every volunteer's time availability differs, you know, family functions, whatever it is. And, you know, there's no guarantee or requirement on when a volunteer can respond. And again, I just want to make one thing clear. Nobody at this table has an issue with volunteers. There are plenty of good volunteers, there's well-trained volunteers, and again, we need to have volunteers.
But it's certainly going to be slower than our paid firemen.
So, again, what the guarantee is when you have a career paid firefighter in the firehouse 24 hours a day, you know that when that alarm comes in, the truck's going to get on the road.
Look around you, look at the other towns. How many homes in Garden City? You see like all the Birdfeld homes all around the county with volunteers. I love volunteers and I support them greatly, but we need our firemen.
TJ, I was at that meeting, and I was there for other reasons, but I have to tell you, I was very saddened by what I saw. Very, very saddened. I know nothing about fire prevention, but I do know that the guys up there have a lot of experience, which on one day we had, and one day we lost probably about 20% of staff. Because even though they represent 10%, they're probably a lot more than the average volunteer, be my guess. That's point one. Point number two, you have a bunch of guys that have dedicated themselves to Garden City and the protection of Garden City. And I didn't think I would say this, but I have listened to this stuff and I'm rather disappointed that no compensation to you guys. It's 30 days and you're done as a civil servant. Who does that? Seriously, who does that? I came to Garden City from New Hyde Park, and I was happy there. But I knew when I came to Garden City I would get even better services.
Correct. And what is it costing a family, a house, a year for paid firemen? It's pennies in an actual shower.
Well, we can talk about that in a minute.
So here, I'm just so sad, and I've been involved. TJ knows me. He knows that I've done a number of stuff in the West. I've looked at the budgets, and I've done traffic, and I'm building and zoning. But to tell you the truth, this was the most disappointing meeting I have ever gone to, and I apologize to you guys. I really do. I think it's disgraceful.
This gentleman
mentioned that he doesn't really know a lot about fire service. I'm going to try and break this down for you a little bit. Your fire protection, I'd like you to think of it as a football helmet. Right now you have a full helmet on. Through the years, the village has reduced your career staffing. So let's go into that helmet and take off all that inside pad. Now they're looking to abolish the rest of your career members. So I'm going to grab that face mask and pull that off and throw that to the side. What you're left with is a shell. Are you still protected? Yes, you are. Is there more risk to life and property? Absolutely. And that's why we feel your safety is in jeopardy.
Yes.
Question. If you guys all came back as paid firefighters in October 7th, how many paid will we have in December?
Again, that's something that we're willing to negotiate with the village.
That's not good. What is it right now?
Right
now,
it's 12 positions.
And how many are?
There
was not a negotiation recently where?
No, there wasn't.
So you guys do not have a guaranteed 10 plus coming in
No.
at any time in the next 6 months.
No.
Nothing.
So just to address this issue, because there was an arbitration award that, again, for the second or third time, basically solidified the agreement saying that we're supposed to run the fire trucks. This is a self-created problem by the village officials and trustees over the last 8 years. They've created a situation by violating contract and reducing staff that has led to now where there's agreements in place that should be abided by. There is other legal cases still out in the future that have been dragging in the courts for 3 or 4 years that could further address that issue. When this award came down on July 6th, we were notified by the chief of the department asking the question if this decision would make the other decisions moot. And if we agreed, he'd rescind his order and whatever. My only email back to him was, would you, Ralph Spazzi, and your fire commissioner, trustee Delaney, be able to meet? That was on July 13th. So July 6th is the order, July 13th I get the email. On July 16th, the chief says, can you meet tomorrow morning? So we said, sure, we'll meet. We had 3 of our members, and he said, be advised, the village attorney is going to attend. When we got there on Tuesday the 17th morning, it was just the chief, it was just the village attorney or associate. Neither Ralph Spazzi or trustee Delaney attended the meeting. We were asked if it made it moot, and I said directly, it depends on what level of staffing you want to implement. If you let us know what you want to implement, we can discuss it and decide on whether or not we can move away from that and move forward. The lawyer said, okay, the other attorney's on vacation, we'll get back to you next week. And we left the meeting, basically 3 minutes. We were fully expecting come the 23rd or 24th to hear back from the chief and the attorney with what they wanted to implement for staffing. And we were fully prepared to discuss a change in staffing because we fully understand that the village is not going to turn around and hire 15 firemen the next day.
So you're willing to say we are perfectly content with this group here, and we don't feel the need, because obviously you feel we've been very safe for the last how many years and days.
This has only been in play with the staffing level that's in place right now. Has only been in place since less than 2 years ago.
Okay, so how many houses have burned down in 2 years? So we're safe the way
Okay,
it is. Just say we're safe.
all right, let me address that question. Nobody has a magic crystal ball.
No, I know that. Okay. I'm just saying.
Okay, 2 months ago, I remember the night because we heard the call tonight. In Stewart Manor, the mayor wants to say Stewart Manor already gets going. on Argyle Street in Stewart Manor, 8 o'clock at night, at the family home, there was a fire. They called 911, got out of the house. The entire house eventually was engulfed in flames, and the first engine on the scene to Stewart Manor, a block and a half from Stewart Manor's firehouse, came from Elmwood.
That's a lie. That's not true, TJ. You got an ex-chief sitting here, you cannot say that.
Okay.
I was on the first ring. I support you guys.
The lieutenant was on the engine, that's completely wrong.
Then I was given the wrong information, I
Completely
apologize.
wrong.
I apologize again. But again,
Response time was 6 minutes. From the time the call was received in the house, the engine was hooking up to the
Sorry,
ladder.
well,
6 minutes. Now, it's Stewart Manor.
again, then I apologize, I was given the wrong information. Again, but that house, again.
That's not my question.
And I live in
No,
Robinson.
but your question is, have we been safe? For the past 3 years, there's been a couple small fires, okay? We've been safe. I think that we've been safe or we've been lucky, okay? Can we come up to a safe staffing level? Change the response policy. Maybe add 1 or 2 more, we have to see, because there's other, right now, 11 guys doesn't even cover the positions that need to be covered. But that's something that we are willing to sit down. I think the village residents should be told what each firefighter means, what the cost is, and what the overall cost per year per household. When the trustees were asked that question last week, they didn't have an answer. They looked at the village treasurer, who looked up and said, I don't have the answer, okay? We could talk about numbers, we could talk about them tonight, or we can move on and come back in a month and talk about them, okay? Eventually, what needs to be decided is you as residents need to tell the trustees what level of service you're willing, or what to have. It's like insurance, you know, your car insurance. You can get this much and get $10,000 of coverage, or you can pay a few $100 more and get $1 million in coverage. I'm not telling you what coverage you need to have. I'm just telling you right now, those discussions are open to be compromised and talked about. We're not sitting here demanding 12 firemen be hired in a month or 2 months. We're not doing that. We're not looking to do that.
And of course, nobody feels like their house is going to go on fire.
Never.
That's not true.
And just so you know, again, I am a village resident, okay? I had a fireman. I was on duty working at the other side of town when the fire came in. And because there were 2 firefighters stationed on the Edgemere Road that day, within 2 minutes, they had the fire out and minimal damage to my home. I'm not preaching from because this is my career and what I do. I'm preaching out of experience. If those 2 firefighters weren't there, there might be a lot more damage to my home. So again, it's a level you have to decide.
You can't argue with this success. I have no doubt, and you heard me at the last meeting, I like having paid firefighters. I just don't like, I buy myself a Ford, and then all of a sudden, someone tells me, no, now you have to have a Mercedes, it's gonna cost you this amount of money.
Okay, so-
X amount of money here, X amount of money here. If we are perfectly safe to a point, I understand, obviously, we'd be much safer if we had 100 paid firefighters. It would, then, we don't need the extra right now, and I think that would suffice with many, many people in the village, and not wanting to have their taxes, which we pay a lot of money in taxes. And, some of us are not only paying taxes, we're paying student loans for our children, and we're paying for this, that, the other. I know, trust me, but I'm just saying, an added $200 a year is a lot of money to me, because of him. But I'm already saving my first $200, so, just saying. That also being said, I do think you need to get a law. It's a major issue. Now, about the grievance, if the volunteer is there, and he can get on the truck and get to the fire before waiting to have a paid guy there, I don't care what your agreement says. Why do they have to file grievance against the volunteers? Why can't you just burn your plate and ice together and make this work?
I will answer that question. First of all, as far as play-ins, I'm looking for 18 years, okay? Like a family. Are there certain personalities that don't come along? I mean, we all live in families, we don't get along, but as a whole, okay, the career firefighters have not attacked the volunteers at all. You know, again, I'm telling you a outside story, I'm sure you've been told something else. Publicly, personally, there's guys here that have been here 30 years and have some good friends on the volunteer fire service in Garden City. I've coached Little League. My children have gone to school with many of the volunteers in Garden City that I thought and I still hope to consider friends. Why other things are being told and put out there, I don't know. Again,
It's all about them not being able to drive.
so again.
Exactly. That's all it's about.
Okay, so
One thing, I've lived in this village since 1951, and one thing that's bugged me since I was a kid in high school is a village this size, with all the wealth here and the taxes and everything else, we don't have a damn ambulance. You people should be more concerned about that than anything else.
Right.
Okay? If you guys would have pushed it years ago to get an ambulance in the fire department, you wouldn't be sitting here today. Because you'd have 1,500 calls a year to answer, and you'd be so busy you'd be hiring 30 more guys. But then you'd be accomplishing something that's really important that's necessary.
okay.
Okay, not that what you're doing is not important, but let's face it, you get 3 big fires a year here.
So we
People every day have heart attacks.
So we understand the question.
That's my point.
Okay. Just to quickly answer that question real quick. We have always been willing. We have a gentleman here who's been here 30 years. He's actually one of the lead instructors for Nassau County in EMS training. There's actually language in the contract going back to the 80s that there's an EMS committee that between the union and the village to come up with plans for EMS. It's the village of Garden City that has never wanted to entertain.
Yes, absolutely.
The firefighters doing ambulance service. The county has always done it. There was a fund, so people know, years ago, somebody passed away and left a lot of money to Garden City to be used for an ambulance. Okay. The money was never used for an ambulance service. It was used for
The rescue truck.
for the rescue truck. Okay? My question would be, at this point, and we've been through this, is why, back in January and February, this board brought in Northwell Health and Winthrop University and had big proposals on an ambulance coming in and providing ambulance service, and here we are 6, 7 months later, and we haven't heard anything about it again. So again, this ambulance service in Garden City has been a choice by the village officials, nothing to do with the firefighters.
I understand.
So, just to make that clear, we've never refused, and we've actually offered, and it's always been a decision by the village, to not utilize the firefighters.
First, I want to thank you very much for your service. I readily give my signature to make sure there is that referendum vote, because I think the will of this village people, our village, should be heard. And if the trustees aren't willing to hear that, maybe they shouldn't be our trustees. So my question, I want to know, is the village willing to continue to talk and negotiate to settle some of this distrust and dissension that seems to be right, to come to a conclusion? How do we get this straightened out? How do we get you guys back to work?
I honestly wish I knew the answer to that question.
So they're not even speaking to each other?
No, like I said, so just to cover the events, July 6th, the award, we got an email on July 13th, we met on July 17th, the last 3 minutes we talked about. Unfortunately, last week, in the letter to the word from the publisher, finding out now that before I got an email from the chief, that the village had already reached out July 11th to find out about placing a legal notice. We feel that when the decision came down, Board of Trustees or whoever thought that it was a good idea to move forward with this. Again, we thought we might sit down and have a conversation and settle this at this point because this has been a long time coming. There's other factors in why this decision, again, it was mentioned to be financial when it was taken back, and it was mentioned to be operational. And then 2 days after the meeting, it was mentioned to be about an arbitration award. So there are other factors at play.
This is a livelihood for all of us.
Yes.
You shouldn't have to, in a safety-sensitive position like that, worry about, am I going to have a job tomorrow to feed my family? And all the work rules and issues there, somehow the trustees or whoever the people are, it needs to be worked out. That to me is the bigger deal. That's what I see.
The most important thing for you guys is you say, now make sure you get the 3,800, 4,000 signatures, so we have a referendum in October. So by then, you'll have a well-informed residents.
Don't hold your breath, they don't
I agree with that. The way the trustees handle this situation is very uncontroversial. So please get the required number of signatures, and so we get a well-informed village. So when we have a referendum in October, we'll find out how the residents feel.
And with the help of the residents, we're hoping to do so. Just to answer your question, and I understand because if it's an unofficial petition and people get signatures like they've done in the past, I mean, 2 years ago we had 2,000 signatures within 2 weeks to say don't make 2 firefighters off. You know, that's not official. This petition that's out right now is an official petition by law, and if the signatures come in, the trustees can't deny it. It has to go to a village election.
But do you have to have voted in the school election?
No, you have to be.
A resident, just a resident?
You have to be on. You have to be a registered voter right now can vote in an election.
You mean for politics, for Democrat or Republican?
Yeah. So this isn't something that can be ignored. If the petitions are in on time, the trustees have to abide by the petition, and it has to go to a vote.
Make sure you tell everybody to vote.
Yes, and if
Everybody should.
yeah.
Listen, I commend you, volunteers. When I retired, I volunteered for an organization for 5 years. During those 5 years, I noticed that the volunteers, no matter what, headache, cold, they take off. Appointments, they take off. The workers, the paid workers, they were there every day. I've been living here for 37 years, and I feel very comfortable if I had paid volunteers, paid workers. Because let me tell you something, $200 is a drop in the bucket, especially today. I don't know how these politicians can sleep at night to throw these guys out in the street like dogs.
Yeah, right.
It's a disgrace.
What was the last day of the petition?
So the petition, 30 days from when the resolution was enacted. Yeah, it's running. So right now petitions are, there are residents out with petitions. There's some petitions out in the lobby if you want to sign. But as we move forward, we're gonna get the information out. We're gonna get out to you. There's some information on the flyers. There's an email address. We're gonna set up. We're gonna get people out to you because we look at it this way. If 50% of the electors are favoring the petition, that means there's at least 9,000 people out in the village that want to sign the petition. So we'll do what we can. I mean, this is a resident petition, and we hope residents will step up and help, but we'll bring in, you know, people have offered from the outside to come and help, and we'll do what we gotta do. There's no scare tactics in this. I know some people have been told that you're gonna be scared into signing a petition. There's no scare tactics. You as a citizen have a right to sign a petition to take this to a vote. And after that petition's signed, there's no decision made. You have the right then to go to the polls and vote the way you want to vote.
What's the date on the deadline?
We're assuming from 30 days, you're talking like August 24th, you know. But like I said, it's, by law, that's what you have.
Are you going to be able to go door to door, or do you need the law enforcement
We haven't, there was something out there that we went in to seek permission and were granted permission. That hasn't been done. Again, it's residents going out, people going out. People are going to door to door. If the village board, you know, wants to stop people from going out and petitioning and getting signatures, that's a choice they're going to have to make. Again, I don't know if I would want to make that choice.
Does anybody know how much a household pays?
So right now,
That's important.
yes, so right now, the only numbers we can do is the numbers provided. So simple math, I noticed the numbers out there. So right now, if you divide the total number put out for salary and benefits by 12, the high round-up number per firefighter is $25 per household.
Make it 50. Maybe you can design it.
So right now you're looking about, for the current staff, about $300. People also have to understand that future firefighters, okay, are going to come in at a lower salary. They have 7 steps before they hit top salary, and future firefighters will be paying into their pensions and also part of medical. So the cost of a firefighter right here is say 25, but if you hire a guy tomorrow, it's probably lower than 15. You know, so again, the adjustments, the costs.
Get a mathematician to write it all.
Well, the village treasurer should be able to give everybody a breakdown on their tax bill and say this is what it cost you. But again, we're going off simple math. You know, and again, it's, you know, we're not telling you what you should spend. We're just telling you what the cost is and what it means.
TJ, can you clarify?
Just to try to straighten the facts out, in the Garden City newsletter, there's a letter, 2 of them as a matter of fact, from the Eastern Property Association, and stating as fact that the potential loss of the village's control over whether a volunteer firefighter or a paid firefighter pursuant to the driving of the trust. It says that the recent arbitration decision leaves Garden City with the choice of either hiring additional paid firefighters, potentially 11 to 12 additional paid firefighters, doubling the paid staff at total compensation, or immediately terminating the 11 paid firefighters. It is our intention to provide a fair review of the facts in order to, and this is signed by all of the directors of the Eastern Property Association. So they're stating this
So
as fact.
I'm the bad guy. I'm the bad guy. I won that case. I won that arbitration case. I'm the bad guy. And that case involved the not backfilling of one position, right? So, you know what happens with lawyers? They like to take some words and they like to exaggerate it and scare people and take some language out of a decision and then blow it up and scare you. Okay, well that case was about backfilling of one position because somebody took a sick day or a personal day or a holiday or a vacation day and they left the ladder truck without a paid driver, a paid firefighter. So we grieved it because we have an agreement that says that paid firefighters operate the ladder truck, basically, first line apparatus. So we grieved it. So the arbitrator said any other arbitrator would have decided the same way. It's sort of, this is so black and white. So it's one position. It was backfilling one position. So they've taken the language, they've taken this language about driving first, being the first out, And now saying you're gonna have to hire 25, this is just not the case. There's no case that's gonna say you have to hire a certain number. There's no case like that. I can tell you, I've been representing them for all these years, and we're willing to negotiate. I can't talk about a call that I made before that trustees, but I'm the kind of lawyer who picks up the phone and says, talk to me, okay? That's how I am. And you don't think I did it?
These people are presenting these things as facts, and people read the garden.
Yes.
And take it as fact and say, well, now they decided 12 was too many, now we're going to have 24. It's out of control.
Yes, because
But the facts should be giving out.
Fake news.
So just, when the agreements were in place, violated a number of years ago, okay, they were held up in court. The village filed a number of frivolous appeals on cases to drag this out 3-4 years. So what happens is, 4 years later, they reduce staff, and then the ruling comes down and says, yes, they drive the trucks. So at the time when it was violated, there were more firemen here. Now there are less. All along the way, we, again, are willing to negotiate different response policies. The number one thing is to have enough firefighters on a fire engine. Okay, we can talk about ladder trucks and rescue trucks. The number one thing is you want to have a fire engine with at least 2 people that can pull up in front of your house and put a fire out. Now, if it's one person, that's fine. At least it's still getting there. And again, this thing about a guy who drives a truck and just parks it, no, that truck, he's responsible for getting the water. There's a pump on that truck that puts the water through the hose. He's responsible for operating that truck to make sure that A, he gets off fire hydrant, B, he can get water through the pump into the number of hoses to put the fire out. So that guy has a lot of responsibilities. Without that truck and that guy driving that truck, any fireman could be, and stand outside and go, where's the engine with the hose and everything? He can't do anything. So again, that, I'm not going to say fear tactic, but that statement is not true. And the village and the union have had plenty of time to sit down and work out a deal that's not going to balloon the budget, because we understand that.
Explaining the fact, because I have been going around with petitions, and I want to explain to people, because maybe they're going to the news, and it's in there twice from the.
But it's not the Garden City News fault, it's the director's fault.
Okay, and
There's a letter.
we have 2 more questions.
I'd like to know, will the existence of the petitions, the receipt of the petitions, will that abrogate the firing of you guys on the 27th of August, or does that
Yeah, will you say?
what happens to you guys? I mean, we have to sit around until October to vote?
No. So, the day you hand in the petitions, that's, I don't know if that stops the clock that day or when the village certifies them, but when the petitions get handed in and certified, the resolution itself is put on hold.
That's put on hold?
Put on hold.
So you remain?
Yeah, there wouldn't be any layoffs or
You remain as
termination.
employees of the village?
Correct.
Okay.
Then
That's what I want to know.
the date of when the village would schedule a special election, that would be put on hold, and then that election would decide on whether or not the resolution either passes and goes forward and be determination, or whether or not the resolution is turned down, and then the resolution would be basically voted down, and then we would continue to be career firefighters.
Can you go back to work?
That's up to the village trustees.
Oh.
We were willing to go to the firehouse last Thursday morning and work. We were told not to, and we were locked out. So, the gentleman in the back.
I had a question just based on a comment you made. You said that you won the arbitration, but then there were frivolous filings in the court. Am I to understand that the village decided to appeal the arbitrator's decision through the courts?
Well, yeah, so what happened is the original decision was back in 2013.
From the arbitrator?
Yes, the original decision in 2013, which upheld which upheld the contract. So we understand the arbitrator didn't make up its own language. The village, the decision came down in February. The village ignored the decision, laid off 6 firemen, and then the arbitration decision went into the courts. And then it was appealed.
Who brought the arbitration decision into the courts?
It was both parties.
Thank you.
But when you violate an arbitrator's decision,
well, I understand why the firefighters were going to court, because you went into court to get the decision enforced. The village went into court for whatever reason they went into court.
Yes, and there's been, just so you know, a number of other legal issues on violations that...
So essentially, when they get an arbitration decision that they don't like from a reputable arbitrator, because I'm assuming you use AAA or a panel that's been vetted, when they get a decision that you don't like, I'm really understanding it as they're wasting our tax dollars by paying an attorney an exorbitant amount of money to go to court, which could probably be used to defend this settlement. So essentially, what we have is financial malfeasance going on because they're just playing games with taking these decisions into court. That's how I see it. So it's not my first rodeo.
I agree with you, and just so you know, in 4 years ago, the village hired a labor attorney. And we have evidence, and it's documented that we were told he was hired to get rid of us, like he did in the different... In 4 years, the decisions that have come down involving this attorney are 23-0 in favor of the union, or so, and it's cost the village close to $1 million.
Yes, and we probably could have had double the amount of firefighters and no tax increase if we took the money that was invested in playing around.
Does this petition protect your 11 crew guys? Because my concern is, if it doesn't, the village can say, we'll get rid of you, we'll hire some nice 25-year-old guys at half, because you're all at the top of your pay grade, and we'll save a ton of money that way. Like, are you protected in any way by this petition?
So, all the petition does, again, is take this to a referendum vote. Okay, if it goes to a referendum vote, and the resolution gets voted down, then we would remain career firemen in Northern City, you know, and then we move forward in a contract. So that, again, that's the case. As far as if, say, the petition didn't go through or a referendum failed, the village wouldn't be able to hire younger guys and call them career firemen, because then it would violate, like, you can't just get rid of guys and say, we're getting rid of them, and then we're going to hire young guys to do their job. It doesn't, you know, so that's...
There are civil service rules and job protections, and you just can't just get rid of people who are senior in service. But, you know, the thing about this is that this petition for a permissive referendum is what the law gives you. This is what you have. This is the right you have. This is what you have to exercise. This gives you your right to vote, and if you don't like the way this was handled by the trustees, this is your right as citizens to petition and have a vote. And that's really it. That's the starting point. I can't answer every hypothetical question, the what ifs, if this goes through and then they do something. I can tell you as a labor lawyer, I'm always having to react to what the employer does. But you know, we're trying to enforce our contract rights and the law. That's what we're doing.
How much time is left on the current contract?
The contract is up. We haven't had an increase since 2011. And you know, the contract's terms continue under the Taylor law. There's no right to strike in New York, so the contract terms continue. But there haven't been increases since 2011. So, you know, the contract is up in that sense, but it continues as an operation of law.
Just to add on that, it hasn't been a signed contract since 2009. process. But in 2009, just to understand, it was a year after the collapse of the economy, and two of the other unions in Garden City had already had contracts that were getting, you know, like 4s and 3.5s and more. And we actually signed a contract in 2009, basically left the full terms, and we took a 2% as a good faith gesture to the village, because we understood that the economy, there was problems, you know. So we stepped up in 2009 and said, we'll take a 2% because we know what's going through. And since that point, we haven't been able to get a signed, agreed contract with the village. So it's 9 years since we've actually been able to even sign an agreement.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions, just some basic stuff, because I'm in favor of getting you guys back into firehouses. I'm going to be getting people to sign a petition. I just want to clear up some things in my head that people are constantly asking me. I know you briefly touched on the manning. Could you just tell me exactly how many guys are on duty at all times in each firehouse, just so I know precisely? Yeah.
So again, up until November.
Well, now.
Well, right now, I mean, before Thursday, there was a guarantee of one firefighter in Edgemere and Clinton, and
24/7.
24/7, and then there was one firefighter in headquarters most of the time, not all the time.
And who? That was an arbitrary whenever you wanted. I mean, how's that?
Well, if a guy was on so. In order to cover 12 positions, like so each position, firefighter position, you need 4 guys. So to have 3 guys on duty, you need 12, okay? And then you need at least one person to cover vacations or whatever. So what happened is, when the positions, one of the firefighters is away in retirement, the position fell to 11. They didn't have enough to cover the guy at headquarters, and it wasn't able to cover vacation. So the decision was made that when the staffing fell below 3 because of a vacation, or there was one full shift without a guy, and headquarters wouldn't be covered. So again, it was arbitrarily done, and you know, so
that's a decision legally within the village boards.
Well, that was the decision by the chief, and that was the decision, that was the crux of what happened and led to this last arbitration.
So that's the man. So those guys, so the guys in each end of the firehouse, they're always taking the pumper out on response?
Yes.
On a fire call?
Yes.
Always the pumper goes? Just
yes.
The pumper, right? And then the gentleman was talking earlier about, I just need to explain to me so I can explain to people. I don't understand if the house is a man. This gentleman was talking about how there's situations when a volunteer could have gotten out first and you prevented him. I don't want to get into that argument, but what I want to know is if the house is always manned by a paid firefighter, how could that decision ever arise? I don't understand that.
Okay, so
is that possible? That a volunteer is sleeping on the truck?
So I'll explain why and how. In 2011, when they started reducing the staffing, you still had 5 firefighters on duty. So it used to be 6, there used to be 2, 2, and 2. So they reduced it to 5, and this is, again, the chiefs of the department came up with this policy. And they knew they had to abide by who drove the truck. So they decided that they were going to reduce the headquarters personnel to 1. And they didn't have a guy there to drive that ladder truck. But they said, if the fire's on the west, the guys that drive from the east, they can stop at headquarters and the guy can get off the truck and then drive the ladder. Okay, that was the decision made by the chief. So they reduced staffing and said, we're going to have the guys drive. So what happened was, again, because there was one instance in the whole year where there was an alarm, and again, this was their policy. There was a meeting night, there happened to be some volunteers, and while they were waiting for the guy to come from, the firehouse, they took the ladder truck and left the ladder truck. So it violated the agreement, and we would say, again, they would say, well, you created this, and you made us delay. So my answer was, wait a minute, you put a policy in place that created an automatic 3-minute delay of the ladder truck to every alarm. Every alarm.
So prior to the layoff, that situation never...
Prior to the layoffs and prior to reduction of staffing, that situation would never have happened.
This situation arose because of layoffs.
Yes, and again, this first to leave isn't again part of an agreement. That's what the chief in 2014 came up with, so that his reason for volunteer can drive. Just so everybody knows, the rescue truck in Garden City has been driven by a volunteer for the last 80 years. The rescue truck, the volunteers were in the firehouse, would leave before the paid guys. There was no restrictions on when they left. So this concept of standing down and first to leave is not part of any agreement. It's a self-created argument that the chiefs and the village officials have put in place. And now here we are years later, and they're pointing at us saying, this is all your guys' fault. You guys are stopping us from doing this. And that's not the case. That is absolutely not the case.
So how many engines and trucks are there in the village? It's only 3?
So first line response has always been 3 engines, 1 ladder. There was a command vehicle and a rescue truck.
And to the young lady's point about the Garden City News, those are very powerful letters written against you guys and bringing up. It brings a lot of fear that people with money can double the size of the department. Are you busy officially refuting that in this week's edition? That's an important thing. We have to go back in those letters.
There was a letter. We put a letter together in the paper also this week. And in that letter, we
specifically addressing what
yeah, we said that the levels of staffing have been negotiable. There's been compromises offered for the last 8 years. And every time we've come up with anything that would involve us still driving over certain apparatus, we were told, no, you either give up all of it, or we're not going to have it.
I just have one last thing, Frank. I don't want to take up any more time. Just people I've been talking to on the block, I know they're concerned about, it's a hard question for you guys to answer, the dysfunction. And it shocked me that the chief of the fire department at the meeting last week, when they fired you guys, said, he did say it was better off for ambulance. Right? Did he say that kind? I mean, I was in the hallway, and I thought he said, we'll be a better department, or something like that. I don't know how any chief could say they'd be better off. So can you explain, I mean, what is this dysfunction? I don't get it. We have to go from we're just going to fire you because we can't figure it out.
Again,
what do I tell people about that?
The dysfunction, again, it's a he said, she said. All I can say is we've never lobbied to get rid of volunteers. We understood, even when we had 35 guys. If we don't have those volunteers there to help fight fires, you're not going to turn around and those wasn't going to hire 35 more guys and say, go ahead guys, do it, we don't need volunteers. There's people here that, volunteered here in the community, I know people for years, and have great relationships with the paid firefighters. This is, again, a small group of individuals that have issues with the paid guys and don't want the paid guys being.
That's what it's all about.
Okay, and so there's something else in behind the scenes, and I'll get into this real quick. In June, okay, the state legislative Senate and Assembly just passed a new bill, and it's waiting to go to the governor's desk to be signed into office. And in that bill, which was, I have the letter here, which was supported by the biggest volunteer organization in New York State, the state chiefs, it says that in a combination department, the chief of the department now has to meet a certain minimum level of training. Okay. I know that the village board was opposed to that bill and lobbied their senator not to vote for that bill, but to go through. Okay. So what's going on now, and this is again, we don't know what all the reasons are, but right now, the chiefs of this department most likely probably don't meet those minimum standards of training. So what also could be going on here right now is the fact that if the career firefighters stay here, the chiefs, current chiefs would have to go out and get more training to be better trained, or they wouldn't be able to be chief. So, again, this is a bill that's passed, so if we can't comply with the new law that's going to be put in place, we'll get rid of our paid professional firefighters, so we don't have to require the chief to go out and get more training.
Because there's definitely more than meets the eye, people are saying. I'm always telling people that the most important thing about having the paid guys, in my view, in my experience, is the response time. Absolutely. We're going to get water to the front of my house much quicker than if we're waiting for a volunteer to show up. I know that's true. We all know that's true. Statistically, is there any place I can go? I hope this proves it out. Does Garden City have the best response time in the in Nassau County? That's
Or a high one.
Is that something we can show statistically? I can show people.
Okay.
Are we the best?
So to answer that question, prior to 2012, we have articles where from the Garden City News and the chiefs of the department, chiefs of the Garden City Department, claimed that we had the best response time. We get the calls in 2 to 3 minutes. You have a truck in the house and everything else. In 2012, they hired a company to come in and do a study, and the company said after this study that we had a 9-minute response time. And when you looked at the statistics, they basically based 9-minute response time out of 1,000 calls on 23 calls. So what the career firefighters, what they did is they based moving dispatching from, we used to do dispatching. You called, we answered the phone, and we dispatched the call. It now goes to Nassau County. So you call now, you get a guy in Nassau County, you gotta wait for him to put it in the computer and then call us. But we knew there was something wrong with the numbers. Okay, the chief for years admitted 3-minute, 2-minute response, now there's 9-minute response, and they took dispatch. So our guys went to the only place in the whole village that actually has everything, and there's a computer that records every phone call, every radio transmission, and our guys went back for the same year period, okay, and collected every call, and the response time was under 4 minutes. Okay, so we presented that information to village officials after they had made the change and said, the information based on that report is wrong. This is the actual numbers. And all I can say is it wasn't met with any kind of discussion. And when President Peter Clancy at the time stood at a board meeting and offered to discuss it and clarify it, at the end of that board meeting, Trustee Dorney at the time went out in the hallway, looked at the press and said, if the numbers are wrong, the paid firefighters must not have done their job. And they never looked at the numbers, never revisited it, and dispatching still today is not in Garden City, it's outside of the Garden City in Nassau County. So I can't, you'd have to go to Nassau County Firecom and see if you can get numbers, but from 2012, it was less than a 4-minute response time.
Next slide.
Trustee Dorney. Former trustee, Mr. Mayor Dorney.
Can you just talk a little bit about what the backup plan is? What I keep thinking is, there's redundancy in the police department. We have a Nassau County Police Department. Not that I'm advocating by any means, don't get me wrong. But what is the backup plan here? We have Chief Gallo addressed me personally at the meeting and said, I cannot guarantee staffing. He said it. It's in the Garden City News. He said it brutally to me. He said it brutally in front of everybody in the room. He said, I cannot and will not guarantee staffing. The point is, obviously, that the daytime staffing is a big concern. That's the message that I took. So now, I just keep sitting here and I'm listening, and I really tried not to talk tonight. I really wanted to listen very carefully to this. And it just keeps coming back to what's the backup plan? When we have that disaster, might be 10 years, might be 5 years, are the volunteers going to be able to cover that? I just, not paid volunteer, but I just keep coming back to we have redundancy in police. We don't have redundancy in fire. Where is this coming from?
Again, until Monday night, the 23rd, at about 8 o'clock, we had no idea where this was going.
So one other question.
hearing correctly, the way this is going to work going forward, if there's not somebody physically located in the firehouse, we are going to have a situation where the volunteers then have to drive to the firehouse, get the engine, and then take the engine to the fire. That's correct? Okay, I just wanted to make sure I was hearing that information accurately. Okay, thank you.
Well, we're still employed for another 20-something days. Go.
What's probably going on right now?
Well, so right now, if you drive by all three firehouses, okay, there are cars there. There happen to be volunteers there. Again, we think this was a bigger part of a master plan because given the facts that there was ads taken out in the paper before a meeting happened and statements made, you know, there was a, again, I don't want to make, I'm not here to accuse and make accusations, okay, but it seems like certain, yes. So right now, it's like a new Christmas present. You know, you just got a new Christmas present, you go to the firehouse every day. When it comes to Edgemere Road and Clinton Road, volunteers never came and hung out those firehouses. Nobody stopped them. They had a room upstairs. They didn't do it. All of a sudden, then you go by the firehouses, 2, 3, 4 cars every day. You guys are hanging out. It's August. I'm sure some of those guys took vacation, maybe. I'm not sure they're available. And there's a lot of kids home from school that are volunteers that are available. Okay, that's what they're showing because they want to see. You know, look, everybody, the fire truck's out on the ramp. This car's here. We're being protected. 6 months from now, is that going to be the same story? I don't know. At 2 o'clock in the morning, in January, when it's 20 degrees out, is that going to be the case? I don't know. You know, and another number that needs to be out there, people know, is we've been told, only 80% of the calls happen during the day, only 20% happen at night, so we don't need you guys on at night. But what they don't tell you is that 52% of all fire deaths in the home happen between 11 o'clock at night and 7 o'clock in the morning. Okay? Now, why is that? Because at 11 o'clock at night to 7 in the morning, you're home in your bed. Okay? So there's a delay inherently when you get notified about a fire in your own house because now you have to wake up, realize it's going. The volunteers are also home, again, sleeping. And it's not a knock on volunteers, that's where they are. They have to wake up, get their bearings, get dressed, and then go to the firehouse and get the fire truck. You know, so again, you know, statistics are statistics, we can twist them any way we want, but facts are facts. You know, 24-hour coverage is there for a reason, it's there for a guarantee, and it's there as an insurance policy that no matter what happens, somebody's going to show up at your house. I spoke to a trustee 2 years ago, a former trustee 2 years ago, he was on the board in the 90s. And this is his exact words to me. He said, we always wanted to make sure there was enough paid firemen on duty so that if not one volunteer showed up, we could put the fire out. That was his words to me. And I said, I wish that was the feelings of the current trustees. I said, because unfortunately, you know, 2 guys here were facing layoffs 3 years ago. You know, 2 brothers stepped up and actually retired, so they didn't get laid off. You know, and here we are 2 years later, and now they're going to lay off everybody. You know, and there is no plan. I think the chief said that, 2 different questions. I had the meeting. There is no plan. When asked about scheduling, I think Mayor Dorney said, oh, the chief's been a chief for a long time. He's going to work on scheduling. Work on scheduling? The 3 firefighters are going to be in the firehouse in less than 10 hours. He's going to work on scheduling. So obviously this wasn't thought out publicly. There was no plan put in place. And they didn't answer these questions. They didn't provide data. What's missing? No attendance records. No records of how many times a volunteer truck responded, how many number of calls. You know, if the volunteer trucks that have been driven by volunteers for the last few years only responded to 25% of the calls, what's the guarantee they're gonna respond to the other 75 now that we're not here? And again, it's not a knock on volunteers, it's just the system in play. We have members here that volunteer in other places, it's been all over the paper, these guys volunteer in their own homes. Again, they know the problems and the struggles, okay? We have jobs, families, double incomes, you know, some guys go to work, come home, their wife goes to work, and they're home with their kids. So they're not always available anymore. And that's why the national trend over the last 3 decades is volunteer departments are struggling and having a harder time. We keep seeing in the paper, the trustees are saying we're trying to modernize our fire department. When the rest of the county and the rest of the country is going in a direction of hiring people to work in the firehouse and transitioning towards a combination of departments, how is going backwards to the old volunteer department modernizing the fire department?
I have a question for the attorney. You said that, you know, we just can't can 25 year guys and hire new guys, cheaper rate. Is it a violation of civil service law, since I understand that all employees in Garden City are civil service, on the civil service list? Would it be a violation of civil service law if this plan were to stay in place and the chief found that they can't cover during the day, and they decide, well, you know what we're going to do? We're going to hire maintenance guys for the firehouse who just so happen to be volunteer firefighters. Is that, and they'll respond with the rate, I mean, you know, as a smokescreen. Is that against civil service law? Can they do that?
Well, that would be an improper practice. It would be a transfer of bargaining unit work. You can't, you know, basically you call it a houseman or a maintenance man, but they're performing the bargaining unit work. So that would be an improper practice under the Taylor law. It's transfer of bargaining unit work. And it's the same with respect to transferring the work to volunteers. If the law recognizes that paid firefighters or paid civil service employees have, you know, jurisdiction over certain work and you can't transfer it without negotiating in violation of the Taylor law. So it's not technically civil service law in terms of, you know, we're talking about civil service rules, but the Taylor law is within the civil service law. So, but it would be an improper practice.
I also want to say I fully support you guys, and I find it quite nauseating that about 2 years ago when they talked about privatizing our sanitation, there was more uproar that people would have to take out their own damn garbage than laying you guys off.
DJ, one last question. All right, so we get this petition signed. Can I take one to my neighborhood and sign? What do I use it at that point? Who do I bring it to?
Okay, there's an email address on the flyer. There's also, I have some business cards, I can give you one. Anybody can contact me. And there's also a sign sheet, so if you do take a petition, just give us your name and number too, so we know who's got it out there. Again, I live at 65 Fairmount Boulevard in Garden City, and you know, anybody wants to come by my house and drop off, pick up, sign a petition, fine. My phone number is readily available, my email. I think the GCA still has me as one of the directors for these years, and I think my phone number is on there. But, you know, anybody willing to help, any residents get involved, you know, feel free to contact us, and we'll get the petitions to you. And again, you know, does anybody else have a further question?
Just a quick question. I was at the meeting when Chief Brian Gallo spoke so rudely to the crowd. Is he a professional firefighter, and does he live in Garden City?
No, he's by profession, he's a New York City police detective, and he lives in West Hempstead.
Thank you.
I mean, he did grow up here, and I think a few years ago, somebody brought that up outside at another public meeting, and I think he said, you know, well, it doesn't matter, my parents still live here, I protect the community, you know, but he did grow up in Garden City, that's when he became a volunteer, but now he's living in another neighborhood.
What's his name?
Chief Brian Gallo, feel free to contact him on his email address. Thank you. Just one thing. I just want to ask any of the guys, does anyone want to say anything?
Yeah, I'd like to maybe.
I do, of course.
I don't know how to explain to you this to you because I'll be too emotional. These men at this table, I was a military man first. I did 10 years of active service in the United States Coast Guard. As a military, become a veteran, you have close ties, not like what I have here. I would lay my life down for these men, and they would gladly lay down theirs for me. In my situation, all of us really, we're all married, we have children, we go through those trials and tribulations of raising a family. We've been challenged by different things. We have children with special needs. We had one member who had testicular cancer, fought through it and came back to work. My wife was diagnosed with cancer in 2008, ovarian cancer. She fought through it because of these men and because of you. You paid my salary, you kept me here so I could protect you, so that I could protect my family. In 2017, my wife had a reoccurrence of that cancer. She is alive today because of you. I don't know how to thank you. My 29 years of service here has been amazing. I have been into your houses. I've taken pictures and done public education with your children. There's nothing that I didn't like about Garden City. I like the volunteers. I don't know where this disinformation came from, this disconnect. The volunteers have supported me through everything I've done here. I started as a firefighter, I'm a lieutenant now. That's partly because of them. I've gotten the respect that I think that I've earned, and I've given them the respect. From the newest probationary firefighter to the chief of the department. So I don't know where that disconnect comes from, but that's very disheartening to me. But I want you to know that these men that sit next to me also stand beside me every time I come to work, every time I'm at home, because they have supported me. Their wives have brought food to my house, taken care of my children, so that I can take care of my wife. And I realize that that's pulling on some heartstrings, and it's pretty rough. But because of you, I've been able to take care of my family, and there's no way I can thank you for that.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Don. I'm a 30-year member. I had no plans on standing up at the village board meeting almost 2 weeks ago. I had no plans on standing up here tonight. I wish the people that left did not. Boss, please don't leave. I always find myself compelled to have to answer, maybe put in perspective. I leave it up to TJ and Rich to talk about the legalities of this all. But regarding, someone in here is a past village trustee. I'm not sure who it was. I remember when the trustees and the mayor used to come have Thanksgiving dessert with us, and during the holidays, they'd bring us things, we'd invite them in, and their families would come visit us. They don't do that no more, and I want to ask why. Next, the volunteers, stand down and first to go. Up until November, I was assigned driving that ladder truck. It was my job, that's what I did. We fought for that because the positional assignments, that's what we have, positional assignments. Somebody's the chauffeur, and when we had two on that particular piece of apparatus, somebody was the hose line firefighter. Trying to keep this simple. But when my positional assignment was threatened, we fight for it, because that's what I do. So when my positional assignment as the chauffeur of the ladder truck, we fought for that, and that's what I do. However, up until November, working in fire headquarters where all the volunteers, that's their place. We were there too. But countless times, they would go first. The rescue truck pulls out, makes a left, if everyone's familiar with, going down the driveway at fire headquarters, we call it. It's unsafe for the ladder truck to pull out in front of the rescue truck on the volunteers and cause havoc, potential accidents, or harm, injury. Countless times, numerous times, they would go first. The ladder truck probably should have gone first, behind the engine out of either outside station, engine and truck rolling into the fire scene, is typically how it should be, operating procedural-wise. The rescue truck with manpower and additional tools, manpower, right in there behind the engine and the truck. So the stand-down thing, I don't know where that grew legs, but that's a bad message, and it's something that doesn't go on. There's no such thing as that at Station 2 and 3, at Clinton Road and Edgemere Road. Tones drop, the bay door goes up, within 30 seconds, we're out the door. There's no competing with apparatus there, and the only other situation where that potentially could occur is headquarters. I'm there to tell you it's not what went on when I worked. To the nice man in the plaid shirt, I don't know if there's a fire service background involved. Great idea, putting 3, 4, or 5 of us, when that's what we were down to staffing-wise, all in the same building to ride the same piece of apparatus, sir. What we would do, though, when there was 2 on the one engine at Edgemere Road, 2 on the engine at Clinton Road, we would respond to the same alarm. One would arrive behind the other. Often, the second engine would park, and we would team up. We hung our hats on the idea of keeping us at the 2 outside stations, cut the village in half, because that would best guarantee that closest engine being at your front door in a minute to a minute and a half, where if you put 4 of us all in the same engine, center of town, for those of you residents, 7th Street, headquarters, Village Hall, the gazebo, leaving their lights, even lights and sirens, to get out to Jefferson Street, it's quite a ride. And when that one would come in and you were assigned to headquarters, it's like, hey, this is a long one. But Station 2's right there, and we'll be there in a minute. So that's why we hung our hat on keeping us separated, sir. But that was a great point. To the very staffing that we see,
estimated to have a crew in one truck ready to go to work.
It makes perfect sense, but what we did was keep us 2 and 2, or at least, like I said, where eventually the one engine would get, we team up and we build that team, and sometimes they... I told the story of the working fire at the village board meeting. It was me and Mike. I was the chauffeur, and Mike sitting down there at the end, had the nozzle, we're out the door in a minute. The nice lady wants to be safe. We're there in a minute. It was a pretty good fire in the attic. We're there in a minute. I began the hookup. Mike stretched the line, and again, not to get into water on the fire stuff all over again, but within a couple of minutes, together with the arriving volunteers, that incident was mitigated, that fire was put out, and again, extensive damage to an attic only. That woman is back in her house today. I want to shed light on the fact that my friends from Stewart Manor, I've taught in that firehouse, the 6 to 7 minutes at that unfortunate fire around the block here, I haven't had one of those in a long time around here in Garden City, 6 to 7 minutes. You want to be safe? We don't know what our destiny is August 27th. We want to be safe. Our wives, our kids, our families, we want to be safe too. Lastly, just regarding being down to 1 and 1, currently there's nobody, but I have to point out, when you talk about the dysfunction, I just use this as an example. We're down to 1 member in each station, 1 member on each of the 2 engines. My good friend and colleague for 30 plus years, Tommy and I have worked together for a really long time. He went to a car fire a month and a half, 2 months ago, by himself, 2 blocks from the firehouse, Lee Road and Stewart Avenue. Wellington, my apologies. Wellington Road and Stewart Avenue, by himself. Did his job, began the hookup, started operating the pumps, and an off-duty or retired FDNY member slid up next. Tommy was checking to make sure nobody was in the vehicle. With an active fire condition well involved, starts manning the engine, controlling the pumps, and hooking up to a hydrant, an off-duty New York City firefighter or retired. hey buddy, you need a hand? Tommy's like, you want to help me get that hose off the truck? Which was the attack line that he was going to use to put the fire out. Tommy received disciplinary action for that move. Just to tell you a little bit about the dysfunction and the unfortunate atmosphere at times that we have to operate under. You have seasoned individuals up here, and collectively as a group of 11, it's a pretty good deal what you have. What you have with the 11 of us is a guarantee. And as the chief told you at your village board meeting, he couldn't give you that guarantee. In any organization, agency, or firehouses, there may be a couple of people that don't see eye to eye on something, perhaps. But what you have here in the firehouses is a guarantee. He told you it straight out. It's the only time they spoke to any of us, because I asked the other chief to address one or two of my issues, but he told you he couldn't guarantee that for you. So you want to be safe? We want to be safe. We have no idea what we're faced with come August 27th. So, thank you for your time.
If there's no further questions, I thank everybody again for coming out tonight. I know it's a tough time, I know the summer. Again, we didn't plan this, we'll work with it. Hold on one second.
Some people want to take petitions. Shall they see you up in the
Yeah,
front?
Mike's gonna go out there, if anyone wants to sign or
Oh,
take
there.
petitions. Got the guy right down here in the lobby. Again, thank you. There will be a video that's posted online tomorrow, so if anyone wants to see the video, feel free. Thank you again. Thank you for the support.